You're all very welcome to this practice support information session. I'm joined today by Tara Doyle, who's a partner at Matheson, and Ronan Hynes, who's also a partner at Sellors. Excuse me, Ronan, slip of the tongue. And I'm joined today by John Lunny, who from the Education Department. So, John, do you want to just introduce how we ended up here today?
Yes, thanks, Justin. So we've been running the Future Legal Practice Summit for a couple of years in January for our PPC trainees. And Tara and Ronan have joined yourself for a panel on the future of law firms, which has been very well received and at big attendances. And our PPC hybrid group are currently working through the Laws Business course, which the Future Legal Practice Summit sits on. So we run a series of lunchtime kind of sessions through August. So delighted to Tara and Ronan were able to join us to do that, to have this conversation live. So I know a number of our hybrid trainees are joining us. But Ronan or Justin, we were speaking and thinking this would be of wider interest. So delighted that it's kind of a collaboration, and we have practitioners and some of our hybrid trainees. So that's really thanks to you all for all our speakers, really, from me, and that's the background.
Yeah, great. So Tara, do you want to kick off there and maybe just introduce yourself, and then maybe just talk about what your outlines on the future of legal practice and what you think is going to happen?
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. As John and Justin have already explained, I'm a partner in Matheson. I have been with Matheson nearly 30 years now, so I'm coming up to my 30th anniversary. So I can probably talk more about the history of the legal profession than necessarily about the future. Because if you're asking me what my outline is, Justin, it's that I'm probably not going to be as big a part of it as the participants on the call today. But given what we've run this session, as John mentioned before in the past, and often what we talk about is the impact of technology and how law firms are evolving, and what has been the impact in particular of recent events like the pandemic and the move to hybrid working, etc. So I think we'll probably be touching on all of those things in the course of this afternoon. So lovely to be with you all.
Great. And over to you, Ronan.
Thanks, Justin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ronan Hynes. I'm a partner with MHP Sellors, offices in Limerick and Ennis. My area of practice is dispute resolution. I trained and qualified in the UK, so can hopefully add a bit more about the UK dimension as well. Over 15 years qualified, and I'm excited today to talk about kind of technology and I suppose new advances in the legal profession, and crystal ball gaze to the law firm of 2050, if we can.
Very good, very good. So we might as well just dive in there and maybe just talk a little bit about like sort of changing client expectations going forward, that this has changed quite a bit since the past. Or what are your thoughts on that, Tara?
Sure. So it's only as Ronan properly introduces what he does for a living, I'm just going to say I'm a lawyer, and forget that since I'm speaking to lawyers, I should probably be a little bit more specific and talk about the area of law that I generally practice in, and that is international financial services. So I work in the investment fund sector predominantly, and have done for pretty much all of my career. So when I talk about changing client expectations, it's hard, like it's always been a very demanding area to work in. And any of the trainees or legal practitioners who are on the call who have had any exposure to international legal work or to financial services work will know that you tend to operate in a very demanding client environment. And also because Ireland has positioned itself as a centre of excellence for the types of products that I advise, you're not just competing sort of internally in Ireland to get work, you're competing with other jurisdictions as well. And that involves holding yourself to those international standards and often being compared by your clients to law firms in London or law firms in New York or the major international law firms around the world. So I would say that in terms of changing expectations, that the first thing is that we're held to a very high standard, as Irish people would expect to be, and it's to that sort of magic circle white shoe standard that you're going to get in those firms. So that's one aspect, I think, of the changing clients' expectations. The other is, I would say that everything that we've been through in the past 4 or 5 years has obviously resulted in a lot more remote contact with people. So a lot more like we're doing today, Zoom calls, and a lot more interaction through video calls rather than meeting people in person, or rather than doing straightforward audio conference calls as we used to do when I was a baby lawyer. And I think what's interesting there is that while there may have been a tolerance, say at the beginning of the transition to that sort of work, for, you know, your Wi-Fi not working, or your cat, you know, appearing in the middle of the screen, or your children crawling all over you. Maybe the cat crawls all over you, the children appear in the middle of the screen. I'm never sure which is supposed to happen, but an expectation that that might happen when we were getting used to this. Now I think there is an expectation that if you were going to take advantage of remote or hybrid working, that it's done in a very professional context, you know, so that you have a quiet place to do it, that you will be uninterrupted, that you will have reliable Wi-Fi, that you'll be on time, all those things that we might have had a little bit more tolerance for as people were getting used to these platforms. But now I think there's an expectation that it is as professional as if somebody was coming into your office to meet you.
Thanks, Tara. And over to you, Ronan. Just to add to everyone, we'll be taking a question and answer session at the end. If anyone wants to ask us a question, we'll take it on the chat. But over to you, Ronan.
Yeah, I think we have seen a shift in client expectations, probably down to we live in such a fast-paced world and now a digital world that expectations have risen. I think sometimes as a lawyer, it's no harm to set expectations and manage client expectations at the outset. But I think law is clearly now a buyer's market, and we probably live in the age of the consumer where clients kind of hold the balance of power. And if you think about what consumers of legal services think about when they go to instruct a solicitor, it's sometimes it can be convenience. It can be ease of doing business. It can be client experience. And I think one of the things we do really well in legal, we provide a very high quality legal service and product offering. I'm not entirely convinced that we sometimes think of the client experience or the client journey along the way. And I think that's something possibly in the future, you know, we can improve upon. But I think, yes, standards and expectations have risen. But I think on balance, we provide a high quality service product offering. But I think there's room to improve, because I think client experience for many clients, whether it's private clients or commercial clients, is really, really important. And I think there's probably some learnings that we can take from other sectors or industries in that field.
I want to meet there. We have quite a tight timetable, so we'll just move on to sort of the impact of technology or the role of technology development. And two things kind of come to mind: artificial intelligence and bots. That these are going to define the future of a lot of legal processing and automation, etc. So, would you have a view around that, Tara, and what your firm is doing to the best of your ability? Can you tell us?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I think I've already disclosed I'm an old person, so I don't think I'm going to betray myself any further by the way I talk about artificial intelligence. But I think one thing that really has struck me as we talk about this is that I think that we can talk about it. So established lawyers and law firms can talk about it very much almost from a risk or a threat perspective. So it's the threat to our jobs of AI, the risk of AI getting things wrong. And you know, if you are an expert in an area and you try using an AI tool to get the answer, you're probably only going to get 95% of the answer, and the other 5% is arguably what we're paid for anyway. So you can sometimes look at AI as unreliable, and as I say, you can look at it from a risk perspective. Whereas whenever you talk to younger people and younger lawyers, they see the opportunities in AI, and they see the way in which AI can take some of the mundane administrative aspects of their work and deal with it really, really efficiently and free them up to do more interesting work. And they see the possibility through AI of almost like democratizing information and being able to really access huge amounts of knowledge and experience that they wouldn't necessarily have just through the sheer years of being a lawyer. So I think there's a balance somewhere between that wonderful approach of seeing it as an opportunity and the very maybe risk-averse approach you can sometimes have as an older lawyer. And I know I was at a seminar over the summer where somebody was actually talking about how we need to be using AI tools. So I think a lot of firms can sort of think about how do we restrict people so that the AI that they're using is controlled, and so that we don't have unauthorized access to AI and we don't have people using it inappropriately. But this particular person, who was a futurist and you know, was a particular specialist in this area, was saying, you need to be practicing this. You know, this is going to be a basic skill for professionals, for humans to have in the future. And if you're not spending some of your time every day figuring out how to use this, then you're going to be like the old person sitting on the sofa not knowing how to use the remote control for the television. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective to have, to sort of think about it as a skill that we need to develop. And a technology that we need to be able to access. And I think that's another thing that it's worth the legal profession considering as a, you know, an approach. When it comes to what we're doing as a firm, we have to, for insurance and other reasons, we have to be quite conservative about how we use it. Because as I say, if you just go into OpenAI, then you can get all sorts of wrong answers. And you have to be really careful about the quality control. So what we're doing, and it's a common approach among large commercial firms, is trying to use AI, but trying to limit it to our own bank of trusted information so that we can use it to access our own expertise and our own precedents much quicker and much more efficiently, but we can still be sure about the quality of what's being accessed. So I think that's a prudent way to approach it right now, but it's probably not really taking full advantage, as I say, of all those opportunities that are out there through AI. I don't think that AI, you know, to answer sort of a part of your question, Justin, I don't think it's going to replace lawyers, because I think ultimately our job as lawyers is to solve problems and to be trusted advisors. And I think we're a ways off actually having computers be able to do that. So it's a little like when they look at jobs and they look at what jobs might be replaced by technology, they always say that hairdressers won't get replaced by technology. They're always going to want to go to a hairdresser, a human hairdresser that you're going to trust to dye your hair, cut your hair correctly. And I think that we're hopefully in a similar echelon to hairdressers in terms of people still wanting to be able to access that sort of experience and that sort of trusted legal advice and problem solving.
And Ronan, what's your view on all solicitors are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence?
Yeah, no, I think ultimately over time, technology will have a significant impact. I mean, I agree with Tara. I mean, if you're to look at the technology adoption curve or life cycle curve, we're still only in the early adoption stage, but anyone who has used ChatGPT or Claude or any of these large language models, you know, the potential is truly phenomenal, and they're going to do more and more into the future, but of course they won't do everything. And I think the probably wider narrative is how further up the value chain will actually lawyers' activities move the more and more we adopt technology. But my big hope, Justin, is that actually we use technology and AI to close the access to justice gap. We know from the OECD that 46% of the world's population have access to a lawyer or legal services. So we've over half the world's population operating outside the protection of the law. And what we're seeing now, more and more countries using or embracing technology, including AI, to help their overburdened judicial system. So, for example, Brazil has 78 million cases backlogged in their current court system. So that is a huge challenge, and its judiciary is openly embracing AI and adopting tech tools to work with the AI to reduce the backlog. So I think we're going to see more and more of this narrative into the future.
And how do you see automation and the tools that derive from that in sort of taking the more lower level legal clerk level work? Do you think that there's opportunities within that area?
Yeah, I think we're actually seeing that already. You know, if you look, we'll probably talk about alternative business models or ALSPs later. They are using technology to do high volume, low value work. But actually, many law firms and indeed many lawyers don't really want to be doing that type of work. You know, it's not high value, it's not bespoke work, and it's actually not probably adding value to the client relationship. So I think most firms are happy to utilize those tech tools as long as we can minimize risk to do that piece of work. So I think we will see more and more adoption and automation, but lawyers using their critical thinking and soft skills, they're going to have a significant role to play in the provision of legal services going forward. Yeah.
Well, I know that there's huge opportunities in artificial intelligence and in all of the tools that are available, but is there still a sort of a trust factor that, you know, you can run it through this bot or this machine and it'll give you an answer, but do you really trust it? Is it really true? Is that have we crossed that gap? A little bit like what Tara was saying about Zoom calls previously. People weren't that comfortable with them, they dropped, etc. But that seems that bridge has been gapped or crossed now.
I mean, I was at the London Law Conference last autumn, and you know, all the IT experts were openly admitting that, you know, AI tools do openly have these blackouts or hallucinations. So we're not there fully yet. But we shouldn't forget that when we utilize technology or AI lawyers have a critical role at the beginning of the task. You know, they feed the data fields and the data into the technology, and they will also have a role at the end to screen the output from the AI tools. So lawyers will still be involved in the process, but as Tara said, you know, quality control is really paramount for law firms, particularly when they're paying the professional indemnity policy at the end of the day, covering these risks.
And is your firm using any form of AI at the moment, like Microsoft Copilot or any of those types of tools?
No, I have to say we're not. I have been using I've been using Claude for the last number of months, just playing around with it and geeking up on my tech skills, but we're not using it in the firm. But it's something we're looking at.
Yeah. Okay. So just moving on then to sort of the managing of people and talent and the sort of hybrid workplace, which, you know, we're a few minutes ago, we're talking about artificial intelligence and we're all going to be replaced by machines, but it seems like it's a very aggressive job hiring market at the moment. There's a lack of talent and it's very competitive. So how does that marry with, you know, this increased automation? It doesn't seem to, they seem to be divergent in what's actually happening in the marketplace. Do you want to take that, Tara?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, like, why do we still need more lawyers if technology is supposed to be making us redundant? And I think that is a feature of just the competitiveness of Ireland. So it is how many jobs we're attracting into the jurisdiction and how many lawyers are needed to be able to service all the work that we have. When it comes to the commercial end in which I primarily operate. But I think also what we have in more general practice areas is increased regulation and a huge amount of just new laws, new rules, very complex. Even the most straightforward transactions have very complex legal and regulatory backgrounds. So it requires a lot of training to be a lawyer, and there's a lot of pressure on people performing these roles. So I think that's why we still need to have a lot of lawyers in society, because our jobs are difficult and that's why they're in demand. So even though we have the potential, I think, to replace some of the admin type work that we do through AI and through other forms of automation, I still think as things currently stand, there's still a very high demand for lawyers. And so it is it's a market in which it's still very much a seller's market, I guess, in terms of law firms really need to be selling themselves to prospective recruits and prospective hires, and need to be flexible around the hybrid working arrangements that they can provide and accommodating what people are now demanding from their own work-life balance.
Would you be able to comment on your own workplace, how that hybrid workplace or those changing workplace environments,
Sure.
how they're working, or like what is the sort of the current thinking on everyone working from home or not working from home, or how is that playing out?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, we had the capacity to work from home. We all had laptops, but people working from home was very, very much the exception. I mean, it was the very rare, you know, if a plumber was coming, you might take an afternoon or a morning to sit at home with a laptop and do some work. And then obviously we went into 100% working from home environment. And then post-pandemic, we started bringing people back into the office gradually. And where we've settled on is a 2-day a week in the office requirement for everyone. And it's usually 1 day will be mandated by your practice area or your department or the particular group that you work in, what day they want everybody to be in, and another day will be of your choosing. Some people are choosing to come in 5 days a week, and we find that's particularly the case with older and younger lawyers. So with the lawyers more used to working in the office all the time, and with the lawyers who feel more need for training, whether they be trainees or whether they be newly qualified solicitors, they expect to be working in an office environment, and they want to have that contact, particularly with older lawyers who can train and mentor them. And then in the middle, where people have different life needs and expectations, and frankly, you know, different ability to be able to pay rents and to be able to buy houses and longer commutes, we're finding that we have maybe people taking advantage of that, only having to be in the office 2 days a week. So there's everything from the 2-day weekers to the 5-day weekers, and we're managing to manage all of that quite well, I think.
And do you see that continuing into the future? You don't see any mad dash to get everyone back into the office and back to the same old?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there again an expectation among us old folks that people might drift back into it, but I think it has been extraordinary how sticky the idea of being able to work from home has become. And I think what people discovered over the course of the pandemic was there's other things that they wanted to do closer to home that are accommodated by working at home, whether that's childcare, whether that's taking care of elderly relatives, whether it's just cooking for your partner, whether it's fitting some exercise in, whether it's getting your laundry done. All those things are a lot easier to do if you're not building a huge commute in. And for so long as we live in cities in Ireland with terrible commutes, I think that's going to be a feature of our working life.
Ronan, would you like to come in here and give us some of your thoughts on just this developing hybrid work environment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, I tend to agree with Hara that certainly the genie is out of the bottle now post-COVID, that we're not going back to life pre-COVID. I think, flexible remote working, it's no longer a nice to have luxury. It's really a prerequisite for law firms to attract and attain the best talent. And on the talent piece, I mean, it's certainly a young lawyers market at the moment. And I'm pleased for all those budding lawyers on the call, because I know how incredibly hard they've worked to get to this stage. And yes, we've increased regulation, but we've also had an influx of UK international law firms into Dublin. We now have a growing in-house function role. 20% of our lawyers now work in-house, and we've two of the big four accountancy firms in recent years have set up their own law firms. So we have an increasing demand for new recruits. And I think given the whole hybrid and flexibility working piece, it's really key for lawyers to offer a suite of measures to attract and retain the best talent, but beyond pay and benefits, like mentoring, career development pathways, flexibility, remote working, because we know younger lawyers, yes, they want to work in tech-savvy law firms, but they're driven by ambition, a mission, but they also want a life outside of work as well, which I think is a new dimension to maybe the legal industry maybe 10 or 20 years ago.
And again, the same question to you: do you see any kickback in your own firm, or just the wider around?
No, I mean, we have flexibility, hybrid working as well. I'm coming to you today from the west of Ireland and County Galway, even though I work in Limerick and Ennis in Dublin. And I think probably not mentioned as much in the conversation is I truly believe that remote and flexible working is actually improving quality of life for lawyers and indeed their mental health. And I think that's something which should be celebrated. Yes, it can be difficult to manage, but as long as firms have clear structures, probably stronger communication channels, that I think it's a win-win for both law firms and lawyers.
And you don't see any negativity around that if I can't see you in the office, that you're not doing your work, that type of thinking?
I think the early skepticism is past now. And I think, I'm sure equity partners always want to look at productivity, but I think if we've seen anything since the pandemic, that actually that productivity in some cases has actually gone up. So, yes, I'm sure management want to make sure that there's no decline in productivity, but I think it's been a relative success certainly at the moment.
Yeah. So maybe I'll move on now to sort of new business models for legal practice and alternative legal service providers. And it's been discussed through the NSRA, etc., that there will be new legal, companies or businesses that will potentially enter the market. So I'd be interested in your comments on that. Did you want to take that, Ronan, initially, or Tara?
Yeah, I can do. Yes.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of these alternative business models. They do two things. I think one, they really increase innovation in the sector, which I think is welcome. I think two, they kind of identify and capture value other than the traditional law firm structure. These are now growing really, really popular in the UK since the market was deregulated there back in 2011. And I know the Legal Services Regulation Act also provides for them, but they're not yet officially on the statute books. And what they do is they utilize a different business model to provide kind of quasi-legal services. So the best example in Ireland is Johnson Hannah, who are an alternative legal service provider. They're not a law firm. So they're a company which are carrying out non-regulated activities, and they carry out what I would describe as kind of high volume, low value work. through a mix of, I suppose, leveraging kind of people, pay, technology, and project management skills. So what this firm does is they have lawyers, but they also have non-legal support professionals and project managers. And there's also a different funding model, right? The lawyers are not salaried, so they take a percentage or a commission of billings. So they can deliver a cost savings of about 20 to 30% to the legal market. So they're incredibly innovative. It's a growing market in the UK and particularly in the US as well. And I think we would probably see more of these substitutes into the future. I suspect law firms are probably not too fussed, that they probably don't want to do this work anyway. But I think it's probably an emerging trend, and we'll probably see more and more of it into the future.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Ronan. I mean, it's high volume, low value, high volume, low value. It's just it doesn't work for a very regulated profession like ours. And so it's very hard to provide those services within the kind of the cost structures that a law firm traditionally operates in. So I think it does lend itself to these alternative service providers. And just what we need to be careful about is that we're not disadvantaging law firms, and we're not disadvantaging in particular smaller legal practices who have all of those burdens of regulation and the costs that come along with it, and might be trying to compete with those providers in terms of the services they're providing to their clients. But I think in a large law firm context, we very much welcome other people doing this work that we don't want to do and doing it effectively and efficiently. Yeah.
And just a question around that as well is just this hourly billing rate, which is a typical way for a law firm to bill out, that there's question marks as to whether that will be retained because of artificial intelligence and alternative legal. So what are your views on that? Will that always be the mechanism as to how you derive pricing and invoicing?
I really hope not, Justin. I really, really hope not. I fear that I won't live long enough to, certainly won't live long enough as a lawyer to see it disappear, because I do think it is at the heart of a lot of the challenges with being a lawyer. You know, a lot of the pressures that go along with being a lawyer, the time pressures in particular, and the difficulty achieving the kind of balance between an intellectually challenging and satisfying career and one that is extremely time intensive and demanding and prevents you from doing other things you want to do with your life. But we seem to have, particularly I think in the last century, become quite wedded to the idea of how long it takes to do something, and that being a legitimate basis for charging. And I think that one of the challenges we have is that the people who employ us are a bit wedded to it as well, as in the clients who employ us. And I think what we really need is to move towards a better appreciation of the value of the services that are being provided, and an ability to be able to truly value them regardless of the time that is spent on them would free us up, in particular, to take advantage of technology, and would also free us up to work more efficiently and not to be counting hours and not to be rewarding people based on the number of hours that they work. So it's something of a nirvana, and I think it feels to me like the slowest evolution. And notwithstanding all of the embracing of technology, sometimes it can feel a little bit like a lot of the technology is just designed to count the hours better. And I think we need both on the client and on the lawyer side a real willingness to divorce ourselves from the chargeable hour, in order to be able to actually give people better quality of life as lawyers, and to give clients better value as well, because it won't just be wedded to how many hours somebody spends doing something.
Ronan, do you think it's the death of the chargeable hour?
Yeah, I think that the conversation is starting to shift, to this concept of value, not cost. I mean, Warren Buffett famously said, cost is what you pay for, but value is what you get. But I think as long as we have this kind of pyramid structure under the old partnership model, it's difficult to kind of see that, diminishing anytime soon. Kind of research in the United States and indeed in the UK would say that, smart firms are also using alternative pricing structures, but it's really probably 5 to 10% of their overall invoicing for the year, like, fixed fee pricing, value-based pricing, these ARA, alternative fee arrangements. But I think as long as we have the current structure in place, And many institutional clients actually prefer, getting a rate card from law firms. I think it's probably going to be the predominant model for some time to come.
Okay, very good. So we'll just move on. I'd be really anxious for some people to ask us a few questions on the chat, because we're kind of coming into our questions and answers sort of piece at the end. But just talking about diversity, inclusion, and equality in law firms, do you think much has changed over the last 10 years in this area? Tara?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a huge evolution in the way that we talk about this now, and the way that law firms, just the same as Irish society more generally, is embracing DEI, and you won't look up a single law firm website without it being front and center in terms of their commitment to it, in terms of what they have done to be properly accredited. So we have from the Irish Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, we've got a gold standard there. So we've spent a lot of time and effort making sure that somebody externally is validating the work that we're doing. It's important from a recruitment and retention perspective, but also it's important from the experience of the lawyers who work here to feel that they can be themselves, and to feel that all aspects of their diversity is actually recognized and is welcomed and rewarded in the firm. I think one of the challenges that we've had as a profession has been access to the profession, and just the kind of the barriers that are there, really as much from an educational perspective, so the traditional Irish system of the CAO, getting high points in your leaving cert, getting into a law degree, and then God help you trying to find a place to do your training, or becoming a barrister, and just the barriers that are there for people coming from a more diverse background, and for people who may not have had the best start in life from an education perspective, or may not have the same advantages that people who went to fee-paying schools, for instance, have. So there's all these aspects to it which are a little bit out of our control as employers, because we can really only fundamentally employ people who have already come through the system to some extent, so either have qualified as solicitors or have finished their degrees and are ready to begin a training contract. And that can be a bit frustrating, but I think the Law Society is making huge strides to provide access to the legal profession and to provide alternative pathways to getting there. And I think the various law firms are also doing a lot of work, working with DESH schools, working with access programs within universities to try and provide that access, and just really trying to create a law firm that looks more like our society now. So that reflects more just the ethnic diversity that's in our society, the gender diversity more generally, that's obviously has always been in our society, but also to have people coming from all social aspects within our society. So it's not just people whose parents were lawyers before them. And I think that diversity contributes then hugely, it's hugely rich. And it really contributes to the law firm, but also it helps us when we're going at a very cynical level. If you're going and pitching for work, your client wants to see in your law firm people who look like them. So they want to see similar ethnic balance. They want to see similar gender balance. They want to see themselves reflected in your firm. And so if you're still staying very, white, male, and stale and pale, whatever, stale, male, and pale, is that the expression? That's not going to attract the clients into the firm. It's not going to attract the talent into the firm. It's not going to attract the clients into the firm. So while diversity and inclusion can be very genuinely motivated, it can also make a huge amount of sense for business as well. So I think it's just become something that people almost take for granted, I think, at this stage, but it's a very, very important part, I think, of modern Irish law firm experience.
Thanks, Tara. Ronan, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we've moved beyond, DE&I being given lip service, and it's now really, really important for law firms, both big, large. I think for the larger law firms, it's strategic. I think it probably happens more organically for smaller, medium-sized enterprises. As Tara said, it makes law firms more relatable. And we know from research, I mean, McKinsey did a research paper some years ago, which indicated that, companies with a diverse law force, they do much better across a wide range of metrics, from, quality of services to innovation, creativity, and indeed for financial performance. And so I think we've made really strong progress, but I think, that there's still work to do. I mean, if you look at the gender ratio of female to male lawyers, we have a strong representation now of 53% of female lawyers, But when you drill down into those numbers, that reduces to 35% for those females that want to become partners. So I think it's a case of, a lot of progress made, but some still to achieve.
Yeah, and just on that one, that the number of female participants as trainees is very high, and then they go into the law firms, but they don't seem to be making this transition into that, and it may have to do with a variety of reasons around families, etc. But do you think the law firms could do more about trying to utilize that resource? There seems to be just a possible loss of female lawyers in once they decide to have a family or move on into that world, and there seems to be an opportunity there.
Yeah, and I'm happy to take that question, just because I am the woman on the call. But we did identify that as a real issue for us, probably I'm going to say about 10 years ago now, when we sort of noticed that there really wasn't we just weren't bringing women through to the same extent we were able to bring men through, notwithstanding that we were probably getting more female applicants for apprenticeships as they then were. And one of the issues and a huge issue that we identified was the impact of deciding to have a family, and the impact of taking time out of your career for maternity leave, and what that really did in terms of people's expectations around what you would then want to achieve in your career, your ability to be able to balance your work and your new commitments at home, and the absolute dearth of proper childcare facilities in this country, or support at a kind of a structural level for people who are trying to rear families. So once your children get to 5, yes, you can send them to school, but below the age of 5, childcare is really just so difficult to manage in this country. And one of the things we identified was this whole idea of, somebody, when they say that they're leaving on maternity leave, maybe they wind down before they go off, but then when they come back in, maybe they don't have time to get up to speed as quickly. Maybe they find that they lack confidence because they're trying to balance so much in the first few months of returning to work. And so we introduced coaching around maternity leave, but really, really crucially, we weren't trying to just coach the mothers, but actually to coach the partners who were employing those mothers, and to make sure that the people that they were reporting into understood the challenges they were facing, and themselves were willing to adjust, so that they were willing to make sure there was a structure around somebody leaving, to make sure all their work was going to be properly distributed around the team, and that when they returned, they would get their clients back and they would get opportunities to work on things, but also that they might have reduced targets and be able to ramp back up to the levels of activity they had before, and that they wouldn't find themselves within a few months of returning feeling that they had to give up, or feeling that they had to go and work somewhere else. Because one of the things that we found about the women that we were losing before we introduced this coaching was that not many of them were deciding to become full-time stay-at-home parents, but instead they were choosing to take a different job, very often outside of a law firm context, but usually they were choosing to still be lawyers, but they were choosing to do it in an environment that they felt was better suited to the new demands that was placed on their lives. And we have found that since we introduced this coaching, and as I said, really crucially, it's coaching not just for the mothers, but for the partners as well. But there's now more understanding of all those challenges. There's now more willingness to have conversations around it. There's now more ability to be able to adjust and flex when people need a little bit more time because of their family commitments. And that has enabled us to keep more women, not lose them to other jobs, but also crucially to bring them through to partners. So the kind of statistics that we were talking about there earlier, where Ronan, I think, mentioned about 35% of women coming through the partner, it's closer to 40% in my firm. And I think a lot of that is attributable to the work that we have done around that maternity leave coaching. It's not the only issue, but it is a huge part, particularly when you think about just that, like the time frame within which you choose to have children, and the time frame in a law firm structure when you generally be considered for partnership. They coincide, and if you don't have a system to actually be able to realize potential of people, then you really stand the risk of losing them at that time when they have to make decisions about how to balance their family and their work commitments.
And Ronan, would you like to make a comment? I'm conscious of the time, so we only have a couple more minutes. If anyone would like to ask a question, we'll take it on the chat. But Ronan, Would you have a view on that? And then I kind of wanted to lead us into the crystal ball of the 2050 law firm.
Yeah, I think Tara touched on there is having that professional supports when the female lawyer comes back into the office, but also that it's factored into her career development pathways, because we all have different pathways, and so sure something can be done to make sure that by having a family, that she is giving every opportunity to secure her milestones along that pathway into the future.
And just in finally now, just to sort of the skills needed for a future lawyer in 2050, the future law firm. My understanding when I was younger was that I would be holidaying on the moon in 2050. That doesn't seem likely now, but where do you see law firms in 2050, and what sort of skills will I need if I'm a trainee at the moment?
Sure. I'm not really sure the skills have changed much. So I think the fundamental skills of being able to be a good communicator and being able to solve problems and demonstrate empathy for your clients, I think they're going to stay the same. I think the new skill that we need to layer on top of that is just this ability to be able to interact and manage AI and manipulate AI to get the most out of it. I think that is, if you like, the new skill. If in my lifetime as a lawyer, actually becoming computer literate and being able to type was a massive development and a new skill that maybe people didn't have 50 years ago, I think that techno literacy is going to be the new skill. But I think the fundamentals of being able to communicate, advise, and empathize are always going to stay the same for lawyers, no matter what we're doing in 2050.
Thanks, Tara. Ronan?
Yeah, I think Tara's hit the nail on the head. People skills are still the number one differentiator. I mean, there's a really interesting model called the Law Plus Skills model. It's a guy by Adam Curvey in his book, The Legal Team of the Future, and he breaks it down to 4 quadrants: law plus people skills, law plus tech skills, law plus business skills, and law plus change skills. But guess what? Law plus people skills is the number one priority in the model. And those skills of client empathy, collaboration, can you work in a team environment? Those are going to be the key differentiators for lawyers and law firms, particularly if we adopt more and more technology into the future.
Thank you very much. Now, I think we're out of time, John. If you want to ask a question, great. If not, we'll close it off. But thanks, everyone, for a really informative session here today. I really learned a lot, even more again, about the future.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks, Ronan and Tara. Just one final question there that kind of is of interest to the trainees, I think. Ronan, you mentioned the partnership model kind of restricting kind of change in terms of pricing. Maybe 2050 or beyond. What would you like to see, or what do you think would make a real difference if we were to kind of change from the partnership model? And do you think we're likely to see it?
Yeah, I mean, one model which is gaining some traction, probably not so much in Ireland, but is in the UK and in America at the moment, is this revenue share consultancy model, whereby lawyers are not salaried, but they take home 80% of their billings, okay? But it's probably attractive to a certain demographic in the legal profession, those who have maybe 10, 15 years PQE, who have a client following, who are highly networked and have a book of business, essentially. And that model, certainly recent statistics indicated that by 2026, one in 3 lawyers in the UK would be freelancing or consultants. And there's, I think, about 160,000 lawyers in the UK. So, if that shift did happen, that would have a significant impact. So I think that the freelancing consultancy model is one. I think we would probably see, in a deregulated market, if that ever happened, I think we would see much more innovation, much more competition. I think that would give different players in the market to come up with different solutions, like the ALSPs, like the freelancing and the consultancy. I think in the future, the traditional law firms will have more competition. I do envisage in years to come, there will be these online platforms providing quasi-legal services. They're already doing it in some jurisdictions. And they will, again, replace a certain cohort of work that maybe law firms don't want to do. But I think it's difficult. The billable hour model has been around for so long. It's difficult to see significant inroads being made unless there is much more innovation and actually investment of finance into into the industry. I mean, we have seen in the UK significant more innovation and investment. I mean, there's 10,000 law firms in the UK, but 1,300 of those are now these new alternative business structures. So these can be owned by non-legal professionals. They can float on the stock exchange. So they have an ability to be much more creative than the partnership structure. So I think if as proposed, I think in the 2015 Act, if these new structures ever came in, I think we would see probably a seismic change in terms of the ability of firms to do different things.
And Tara, a final word?
I would love that in 2050 somebody is calling me up to say, we've heard about this thing called the billable hour, and we haven't the faintest idea what anybody's talking about. You used to be a lawyer. Could you explain to us what that was? That's my dream for 2050.
Ronan, final word?
Yeah, I'm excited for the future. I think there's never been a better time to practice law. I think change is already happening. We're going to get much more innovation. Technology will be a driver, but back to basics. It's still about people. It's still about lawyers doing a really good job, using their hard and particularly their soft skills to advise, empathize, and represent clients into the future, and also not forgetting access to justice. That is a big issue which we have to face in the future, and that's why I think technology can address that issue both in Ireland and indeed across the world.
Well, thank you very much. And John, do you have a last word for us?
No, a lot of food for thought. I see people posting in the chat there, so I think we'll be thinking about some of these things. I know I certainly will anyway. And just thanks to Tara and Ronan again for joining.
Yeah. So thanks, Tara. Thanks, Ronan. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Slán, Muscur Margaret.
Thank you all.